How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Daf Hey, Daf Vav of Masechta Shevuos, friends. Okay, here we go. We're going to start on Daf Hey Amid Aleph, about 10 lines, I'd say, into the Amid. All right, here we go. So there's two dots, about 10 lines or so into the Amid and Daf Hey Amid Aleph Gufa. We said yesterday, Minayin she'enu chayiv elo al sheyesh bo yediyah batchila v'yediyah basof elam bein tayim tamlom v'nelam m'shnei pamim d'vir b'kiva. Okay, this is a repeat from yesterday. How do we know that by korban ola v'yored you'd only be chayiv by yediyah satuma when there's a yediyah batchila and yediyah basof and a helim bein tayim? So Rabbi Kiva, without getting into it, Rabbi Kiva had said because it says v'nelam, but we're gonna focus really on Rebbe's opinion, which is Rebbe Yomi says, Rebbe Einu Tzarech Arehu Omer V'nelam. This is the important part. The Rebbe says that, well, when Memela the pasuk says, see, the pasuk says twice V'ne'elam, and it also says Vehu Yada one time. So it says, Rebbe, look, Memela when it says V'ne'elam, that it became hidden, it became forgotten, became concealed, implies that it was at one point revealed. I.e., the word v'ne'elam inherently implies that there was initially knowledge of it, which then became concealed, lapsed. So memele ne'elam implies that there was a yediyah batchila, and then there was a lapse. And then when it says v'hu yada, and when it says then that and he knows, it means that there was an additional yediyah. I.e., there was an initial yediyah, and then it was v'ne'elam, there was a lapse, and then there was an additional yediyah, v'hu yada, right? So arekan shtei yediyas. So there's yediyah batchila, yediyah basof, v'helam be'emtza. Imkein matamlo v'ne'elam. Then why does it say v'ne'elam twice, right? Because from the first v'ne'elam, we already, right, there was an implied yediyah, and then it also says v'hu yada, so we have yediyah, he'elim, yediyah. Why do we have another v'ne'elam? Well, l'chayiv al he'elim tuma ve'al he'elim mikdash. To be mechayiv, so the first v'ne'elam talks about he'elim tuma, when you were tameh, and then you forgot that you were tameh, and you went into the Beis HaMikdash, you ate kodshim. And the second he'elim is to say also tumas mikdash. Right, that if you knew you were tameh, but you didn't realize that you were in the Beis HaMikdash, that it was the Beis HaMikdash, or you didn't realize that it was, you forgot that it was kodshim. So mechayev there as well. So so far we've seen all this yesterday. Now, Amar my v'ne'elam mechlal she'yada my mashma. So now the Gemara asks that when Rebbe says that memela inherently in the word v'ne'elam that there was a lapse, that implies that there was initially knowledge and a subsequent lapse of knowledge. So v'ne'elam inherently implies an initial yediyah. My mashma, how come v'ne'elam implies an initial yediyah? Amarav midelo ksiv vehu aluma mimenu. The pasuk does not say Vihu aluma mimenu, it is completely hidden from him. Doesn't say that. It says v'ne'elam mimenu, it became hidden from him. Implies that there was an initial yediyah. Amalei Abai. Now Abai asks some interesting questions. Elameato gabe seito by a sota. What's a sota? Sota is there's a husband suspects that his wife is having an affair with some gentleman, and he warns her, don't spend any time with this gentleman anymore. And then there's at least one witness. I think this is where even one witness would work, and right, to say that she was secluded. So then she drinks this whole potion. Now it says in that context, it says v'ne'elam, right? V'ne'elam me'enei isha. So if we're going to say that ne'elam means that there was a lapse, i.e., it's unclear to me exactly what the lapse is, but let's just say that there was some lapse, i.e., that he was aware that she either secluded herself with this gentleman after she was not supposed to, or that they actually had bia. He was aware of some kind of wrongdoing, something that his wife had done something she was not allowed to do. But basically the point is that once already, right, he warns her, if she then secludes herself with this gentleman, or certainly if they have bia, he is no longer allowed to be with his wife anymore. They can't sleep together anymore, right? So he warns her. Okay, so as long as she doesn't, as long as she doesn't seclude herself with that, right, this gentleman, so then all is good, right? They have a happy marriage. However, if she does seclude herself with this gentleman, well, then the husband and wife can no longer be together. Now, the implication of v'ne'elam, if we're saying that ne'elam always means that there is a lapse, and that means that he had initially known that she, let's say, secluded herself with this gentleman after the warning, but then he forgot about it, implying that then once there was this lapse and he forgot, he was then with his wife during this time that he had forgotten, but had initially known and then forgotten, and he had slept with his wife in the meantime. The thing is that, as we're going to be seeing in a second, as we've seen in Masechta Sota, the Sota water only does its thing. Right, so let's go back to for a second. So Michlal da have a yada meikar, which means that he had some kind of yediyah initially, that like he knew that she was secluded, but then he had a lapse, and then during that time he slept with his wife when he was not allowed to, because she was secluded with this person who she wasn't allowed to be with after the warning. So he have a yada, but if this was the case, that he had initially known, but then had this lapse, and then they had slept with each other during the lapse, mi bad kula maya, but then how could it be talking about that situation of v'ne'elam, where there was a lapse, because then the sota water would not check her? V'atani, we learn in the Brisa, v'nika ish me'avon, v'aisha itises avona, that the husband will be clean of any sin, of any misdoing, and the wife will bear her sin, right? If she had an affair, so then she will be killed by this water. So bismancha, but we say v'nika ish me'avon v'isha ahi tisas avona, bismancha ish menuka me'avon hamayim both knesishto, that only when the husband is clean of any sin, i.e., that that he never had slept with his wife subsequently, because if he was with his wife subsequently, then the sota water would not do its thing. So only when he had not yet been with his wife subsequently, only when he had not been with his wife subsequently, would the sota waters work. Ein ha'ish menuka me'avon, but if he is not clean of sin, i.e., he had been with his wife subsequently, ein ha'mayim bod kinesishto, the mei sota would not do its thing, would not check. And therefore, how could we be saying that v'ne'elam in the context of sota means that there was a lapse, and in the interim he had beer with his wife, but then the whole sota thing wouldn't work at all. Visu, and more so, gabiteda dichsiv v'ne'elmo me'ene kol chayu me'of hashmayim nistara, that it says in Eov, describing the Torah, that it was ne'elam from the eyes of all living things and from the boids. So v'ne'elam michlal de'ika dehava yodabe. Does that imply that v'ne'elam, that there was a lapse, but there were those who knew about the Torah and then lapsed? But v'aksev lo yoda enosh erka, that nobody knew its value. So what exactly? So what's the deal with this ne'elam thing, right? If we're saying that ne'elam means that, if we're saying that ne'elam means that there was some kind of a lapse, so then that would mean that whenever it says ne'elam, there's a lapse. But then that gets tricky, because how do you understand sota? How do you understand the description of the Torah in Eov, right? The Eov describing the Torah, that nobody knew about it, that it was lapsed. So where am I? So Elo Amar Abaye, rather says Abaye, Kasaver Rebbe Yedias Beis Rabu Shma Yediah. Chevet, this is very interesting. Here's the thing. Rebbe holds of this concept of Yedias Beis Rabu Shma Yediah. Who can explain to me what this means? It's a very interesting concept. It means that when a young boy goes to Cheder and his Malamed teaches him a halacha in Cheder, so it's considered that he knows the halacha. And now let's give an actual example. Well, this young boy is in cheder, and his melamed teaches him that if you touch a dead mouse, you become tameh. A dead mouse is a sheretz, it's an avatuma. If you touch it, you become tameh. He learned this in cheder. What then happens? He grows up, and what are we talking about? Right, exactly. So it's Yediyas Atuma, right? So he grows up, and now he's a bocher, and he touches a dead mouse, but he doesn't put two and two together. Yeah, okay, touch a dead mouse, but he doesn't put two and two together. He realizes, like, oh, now I'm tameh. Yeah, he's aware, right? He touched something. He's like, oh, gross, that's a mouse. And he goes on with his life, goes to the Beis Hamikdash, he cuts and whatever. He doesn't put it together, two and two together, to say, wow, I'm tameh. So that is the idea, batchila, that Rebbe is talking about. That meaning that, right, that when we say that v'ne'elam implies that there was the idea initially, we're even talking about, it doesn't even need to be that he like explicitly knew about it. It's even the fact that like he may have touched it and it didn't even register, but the fact of the matter is that he was at one point in his life taught the halachis of tumah, and therefore that would be enough to be considered a yediyah, which is not the case, right? So that wouldn't necessarily apply to a sota or to the description of the Torah, right? Because when we're talking about a yediyah, we're talking about even this like kind of yediyah that isn't really a yediyah, right? So therefore, when Rebbe is talking about that there was a yediyah, that v'ne'elam means that there was a lapse and that there was initially a yediyah, the yediyah that we're talking about is not necessarily like a full-fledged yediyah. It could be that it didn't even click in his mind that he's tameh, but what does register is that, oh, wow, I accidentally touched this dead mouse. Yuck, that's gross, but he doesn't realize that he's tameh. That would nonetheless be considered, we would already consider that to be a yediyah. Where am I? So Amalei Rapapa Labai, but then Rapapa says Labai, but Ela de Katoni Ein Ba Yediyah Batchila v'Yesh Ba Yediyah Basof Mika Deleisle Yediyah as Beis Rabbo. But then Rapapa asks Abai an interesting question, because then basically, how would it be possible to have a situation of, right? Because the Mishnah had mentioned there's also a scenario of Ein Ba Yediyah Batchila v'Yesh Ba Yediyah Basof. How can you have a scenario of Ein Ba Yediyah Batchila? Because if we're saying that basically even when he touches, right, he touched a dead mouse, and we're saying that even when he doesn't realize, there was no yediyah, he didn't even realize that he was tameh, we're going to consider it that he did realize he was tameh because yediyah rabu shmei yediyah. So how can you ever have a scenario of ein ba yediyah batchila? So answer to Gemara, in mishkachas la b'tinok shenishba levin anochim, tinok shenishba. Well, what if you had a kid who didn't have the zchus of going to cheder? What if a kid didn't have the zchus of going to cheder? And he becomes a bocher, and he had never gone to cheder, and he touched a dead mouse. He doesn't even know that he doesn't even know bichlal that he's tamei. That's where you have ein ba yediyah batchila v'yesh ba yediyah levasof. But if he had learned about it in cheder, then that would already be considered memela a yediyah. Okay, so now we're moving on in the Mishnah to Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shenarba. That the Yitzias on Shabbos are two that are for frek the Gemara. It's not awesome. Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim V'Shtayim Shein Arba Bachutza. Okay, Masechta Shabbos. So, okay, here Masechta Shevuos we said Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba. Now, if you check the first Mishnah Masechta Shabbos, actually it doesn't say that exactly. It says Yitzias Shabbos. Right, he quotes it over here. Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim V'Shtayim Shein Arba Bachutz, that there's two that are for inside and two that are for outside. I guess inside being hachnosa and outside being otza. What does Rashi say? Bifnim shtayim l'chiyuv achnosa. Yeah, b'diuk. Right. So inside is hachnosa and outside is otza. Now, Maishna hocha detana shtayim shein dalid v'sulo. How come here in Masechta Shevuos we simply say Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba, Umashna Hasim, but over there the Tani Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim Shtayim Shein Arba B'chutz. Yet over there Masechta Shabbos we're saying not just two is four, but two that are for inside and two that are for outside. How come there's seems to be more layers in Masechta Shabbos, more so than in Masechta Shevuos? And for the Gemara Hasam, the Iker Shabbos who, well, over there, it's Masechta Shabbos. Of course, we're going to go into more detail in Masechta Shabbos about Shabbos. Tani Ovis v'Toladis. So Masechta Shabbos, we're talking about Ovis, Hotzah, and Toladis, Hachnasa. Hacha delav Iker Shabbos who, Ovis Tani v'Toladis lo Tani. But over here, where this is not Masechta Shabbos, it's Masechta Shevuos. So sure, we're mentioning a concept from Masechta Shabbos, but we're not going to go into it in the same level of detail as we do in Masechta Shabbos, and therefore we suffice by saying Shtayim Shein Arba, and we don't get into the whole Bifnim and Bachutz thing, right? Meaning, so over there we talk about in Masechta Shabbos, so Avos and Tolados. Over here we're only talking about Avos. So Shabbos, right? So where am I? So Hacha Delafik Shabbos, Avos Tani v'Tolados lo Tani. We only mention Avos, we don't mention Tolados. Perfect Gemara, Avos Maininu, Yitzias Tarte Havim. Perfect Gemara, 1 second. Chev, if you remember when I explained the Mishnah, Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba, I said, how do we get Shtayim Shein Arba? Well, 2 of them are Hotza'ah, right? The Balabais picks up the item in the house, picks it up, does an Akira, sticks his hand outside the window, puts it down in Rishus Harabim, does Anocha. So that's one Hotzah. The other Hotzah is the Ani sticks his hand into the house, picks up something, and then brings it outside and puts it down. That's the second type of Hotzah. And then there are 2 Hachnasas. The Ani picks something up outside, sticks it through the window and puts it down inside. Or the Balabais sticks his hand outside, picks up something and brings it inside and puts it down. Those are the 2 Achnasas. So when I was explaining Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba, 2 of them were Hotzah, 2 of them were Achnasa. But now we're trying to say that here in Masechta Shevuos, because it's not the main sugi of Shabbos, we're only talking about Hotzah, we're not talking about Achnasa. But if that's the case, right, as we just said, mine in Yitzias Tarte Havim, but then we only get 2. Where are we getting 4? And if you can say, well, it is only talking about Yitzias, right, Hotzah. And when we say Shtayim Shein Arba, 2 of them are you're going to be Chayiv a Korban for, and 2 of them you're going to be Potter for. How so? So I just explained the 2 scenarios of Hotzah that you'd be Chayiv a Korban for. If the Balabais picks it up in the house, puts it outside, puts it down outside, or if the Ani sticks his hand in the house, picks up something and brings it outside, those 2 would be Hotzah that you'd be Chayiv a Korban for, Bishogeg. What's the scenario of where you'd be Potter? Well, in order to be Chayiv, you'd have to do the entire Malacha. You'd have to do the Akira and the Anocha. Remember from Masechta Shabbos? We'd have to pick it up in one Rishus and put it down in another Rishus. But what if you partnered on the Malacha? What if the Balabayas picked it up and the inside the Rishus HaYachid, and the Ani put it down in the Rishus Harabim? So they're partnering. Neither one did an Akira and the Hanocha. The Balabayas did the Akira, the Ani did the Hanocha. So for example, if the Balabayas picks up the item in his house, okay, in the Rishus HaYachid, the Ani sticks his hand into the house, the Balabayas places the item in the hand of the Ani in the house, the Ani then brings his hand outside and puts it down. So the Balabais did the Akira, the Ani did the Anocha. Alternatively, if the Balabais picks it up in his house, sticks his hand outside the window, the Ani then takes it from the hand of the Balabais once it's already outside and puts it down in Rishus Harabim. So again, they split the Akira and the Anocha. So in that case, they would be Potter. So Shtayim Shein Arba, so we could say it's only talking about Hotzah, and 2 of them you'd be Chayiv for, and 2 of them you'd be Potter for. But Vadumi Demaris Negoyim Katani. Mahasam Kulul Chiyuva, Afacha Kulul Chiyuva. But 1 second. We are listing also Maris Negoyim in the Mishnah here in Shevuos. Maris Negoyim, you're Chayiv for all of them. So here also we're talking about where you're Chayiv for all of them, not where you're Potter for some of them. Elam Rapape, rather says Rapape, awesome, the Iker Shabbos, Tani Chiyuve Ufturei. In Masechta Shabbos, where it's the main place where we're talking about the halachas of Shabbos. So there in Shabbos we'll mention some things that you're chayiv for, some things that you're potter for. Shtayim Shein Arba b'fnim, Shtayim Shein Arba b'chutz. Some of them you're going to be chayiv a korban for, some of them you can be potter for. When you do the whole malacha yourself, you're chayiv. When you partner on it, you're potter. But hacha over here in Shevuos, however, chiyuve katani ufture lo katani lo tani. But over here in Masechta Shevuos, we're only talking about the things that you're going to be chayev for. We are not getting into the things that you're potter for. Chiyuve ma'ininu. What are you chayev for? Yitzias sarte hudavin. But what are you chayev for? Only the hotzah. If you do both akira and anacha and the hotzah. But there's only two of those. Right? There's only two scenarios of hotzah that you'd be chayev for, as I explained earlier. Shtaim de hotzah v'shtaim de achnasa. Well, if you say that 2 for hotzah, but also 2 for achnasa, well then you get 4. But yitzias katani. We said yitzias hashabbos shtaim shenarba, not yitzias v'achnasos. So Amr of Ashitana achnasa nami hotzah karila. Well, the Tana of our Mishnah in Shevuos, when it says Yitzias HaShabbos, it is also including Hachnosis HaShabbos. Mimai, how come? Well, it's Tanan. If you think about it, in the Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, it says Hamotzi merishus lerishus. When it lists the Avos Melacha on Daf Ein Gimel of Masechta Shabbos, Avos Melacha Arbaim Chaser Achas, I think, something like that. So it lists Amotzi merishus lerishus. Now, interestingly, it says Hotzah from one rishus to another rishus. It doesn't say Hotzah from rishus Hayachid to rishus Harabim, i.e. Hotzah. No, it just says Hotzah from one rishus to another, implying even from rishus Harabim to rishus Hayachid. Hachnos. Right. So the Tanan Amotzi merishus lerishus chayev. Milo askinon tikama ayla yule vikakari le Hotzah. Are we not also including a scenario where he's bringing something inside Hachnosa, and we're still referring to it, including it in Hotzah? But wait, maybe it is specifically talking about Hotzah from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. But then the Mishnah should say somebody who's motzi from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. It doesn't say that. What does it mean? Motzi me rishus lirishus. Whichever rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid. That even from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, which is Hachnasa, is still referring to Hotzah. It is referred to as Hotzah, even though it's Hachnasa. V'taima mai, how come? Because Tana kol akiras chayfetz mimakomo Hotzah karele. Because our Tana refers to any time that you are removing something from its domain and placing it into another domain, that would be considered Hotzah. Whether you're removing it from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, or from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, you are taking it out of the domain that it is currently in. And therefore, when our Mishnah says Yitzias HaShabbos Shtayim Shein Arba, it's Yitzias includes also Hachnosis. Amr Ravina says Ravina Masnisa Nami Deka, and this can also be implied from the first Mishnah in Shabbos. The Katoni Yitzias Shabbos Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim V'Shtayim Shein Arba B'Chutz become Mefarish Hachnasa. Shma Mino. If you look at the first Mishnah Masechta Shabbos, it says Yitzias HaShabbos. Right, so Yitzias HaShabbos doesn't say Echnos HaShabbos, it says Yitzias HaShabbos. Shtayim Shein Arba Bifnim, Shtayim Shein Arba Chutz, and then what's the thing that it immediately starts explaining? A scenario of Achnasa. So it's talking about Yitzias and immediately starts describing Achnasa. So clearly Yitzia also refers to Achnasa. Rava Amar says Rava Rishuyis Katani Rishuyis Shabbos time. That Rava says that when we talk about Yitzias HaShabbos, actually it's referring to Rishuyis HaShabbos Shtayim Shein Arba. So meaning there are two different Rishuyas. There's Rishus HaRabim, there's Rishus HaYachid. Whether it's Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, whether it's Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, it's all falling under, it's all being included here. And there are two, right, Shtayim Shein Arba, 2 for Hotzah, 2 for Achnasa. That was Daf Hey of Masechta Shevuos. We're going to stop here because after this we'll get, right, the next words are Maris Negayim Shnayim Shein Arba. Tomorrow, tomorrow's going to be about Saras, which is interesting to the extent that at least, I think by the time that you record this, it's already going to be Parshas Mitzorah, which is Takat Saras. I mean, Tazria also talks about Saras, but, right, Zos Toras HaMitzorah B'yom Toras HaVuva LaKoyit, right, so next, right, so we're mamish in like the Saras Parshas now. So it is relevant, but it is also very technical. So tomorrow I think we'll just do all of the tzaras stuff tomorrow. So I'm sure we're all very much looking forward to that. Have a good one. Peace out.